the African child. I know I have quite a note and a list of things I want to talk about. But the first thing I want to talk about is growing up as an African child, being an African child. It's not something we get to talk about every day because growing up as an African child may look so easy and simple, but it's pretty much one of the biggest tasks of child upbringing. Because growing up in Africa, especially being from Port Harcourt, River State, Nigeria, you grow up around a religious atmosphere where you get to hear about God, you get to hear about the moral rights of a human being and why you should do things in modesty and in the right way. That's a very beautiful atmosphere to grow up as a child. But we never talk about the harshness of parental upbringing in Africa. And this has helped us in good ways, in the sense that African children are one of the, main, or how will I put it, major black children who end up having an educational degree. Africans are known for going to school. Africans are known for finishing school and having all manner of degrees. But that's not what I want to talk about today, but I want to talk about how does it feel to grow up in Africa. I lived in Port Harcourt for 18 years before I moved to Canada. And during my 18 years living in Port Harcourt, I lived with my parents. And my parents were an average, home. And we had the basic amenities like water, light. My mom had a car, my dad had a car. We went to good schools and we were able to speak fluent English, unlike most African children. The average African child grows up in a home where he doesn't even have these basic amenities rather. And when this child even has them, it is like a big deal. Unlike in the Western world, where every child is entitled to an education, every child is entitled to water, every child is entitled to good clothing, every child is entitled to all these basic amenities that life has to offer. And this is far from the African child. So the African child has to live with the fact that he cannot access these things. And sometimes you see these children going to sleep in hunger. You see these children not having a good sound education. And in some places and in some states, these children are put into harm's way. And this is the way of life for an African child. And after a while, this child grows up. Obviously, this child becomes a teenager. He's now in his teens. And he sees that his friends, his colleagues have better, resources to life. They have a good cell phone. They have good clothes. They have 3 square meal. It pushes this teenage child looking, and asking questions. First, looking for how to get these things. Secondly, asking questions. Why don't I have these things? Are these people far, far better than myself? Why was I born into a parental situation? And this is the everyday of an African child. So growing up from a poor African home is totally different growing up from a middle class African home, and it's totally different from growing up from a rich African home. And the poor Africans are the worst of them all because they get to be humiliated, they get to be raped, they get to be abused, and they have no one speaking up for them. Not even the Church of Jesus Christ, which have enriched herself in the African heritage. The church now has a big, power and authority in African countries and in the continent of Africa. We see the church having power and authority. Pastors, bishops, and priests have control when it comes to matters that governs Africa and the African child. And in history, we've seen how African children have been humiliated and have been accused of witchcraft in so many states. Some were even beaten and some were even burnt alive. You know, this is the devastating state of the African child, and it aches me because I see my community and I see my African people day after day being ridiculed on the media, being ridiculed as a community, and being humiliated as a person, even traveling such a long mile to come to these places, to come to America, to come to Canada, to come to the UK. And after this whole trip, it's not like life is even better for the African child.